It was supposed to be the wedding of the decade. But seconds before saying "I do," he read a crumpled note from his maid and asked his bride to leave. Alexander Mercer wasn't just a groom standing at an altar. He was a self-made billionaire who had built an empire from nothing. A man who had spent 30 years reading people the way others read morning newspapers. He had the kind of mind that noticed everything. The slight hesitation before a handshake. The smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. He never made mistakes, or so he thought. The cathedral that morning looked like something lifted from a film set. Golden light poured through stained glass windows, casting warm patterns across 300 guests dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits. A string quartet played softly in the corner. White roses lined every pew. Outside, 2 news vans sat parked, not because anyone had invited the press, but because when a man like Alexander Mercer gets married, the world tends to pay attention. He stood at the altar in a charcoal suit that had taken 6 weeks to make. His silver cufflinks caught the light. His jaw was set. His eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes that had closed billion-dollar deals in conference rooms across 4 continents, were fixed on the cathedral doors, waiting. Welcome to True Spark Stories. While you're here, please hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And let's get into this, because what happens next will leave you speechless. His fiancée, Vanessa Cole, seemed like the perfect match for his 1% lifestyle. She was elegant without trying, intelligent without being cold. She had entered his world at a charity gala 2 years earlier, laughing at something a guest had said, and Alexander, a man who hadn't genuinely laughed in years, had walked across the room before he even realized his feet were moving. She was warm in ways he had forgotten warmth could exist. She made his penthouse feel less like a museum and more like a home. He had proposed within a year. His attorneys had advised caution. His oldest friend, Marcus, had sat across from him over whiskey and said plainly, "You're moving fast, Alex. You don't move fast." But Alexander had looked at him and said something that would later break his own heart to remember. "At my age, when peace finds you, you don't question it." But Vanessa had made one fatal error. She thought the help was invisible. She didn't know that for 3 days the maid had been watching and listening. Sarah Okafor had worked in Alexander's household for 22 years. She had arrived when the penthouse was still a modest apartment, when Alexander ate takeout 4 nights a week and slept on a second-hand mattress because every dollar went back into the business. She had watched him grow. She had packed boxes when he moved to the first real house. She had ironed shirts before board meetings that would change his life. She had lost her own husband to illness 6 years ago, and Alexander had quietly paid every medical bill without being asked, without mentioning it, without expecting anything in return. She was 61 years old. She wore a gray uniform. She moved through rooms like a shadow. Guests at dinner parties talked freely in front of her the way people talk freely in front of furniture. She was, to most people who passed through Alexander's world, completely invisible. That invisibility had never mattered to her, until it did. It started 3 months before the wedding, small things at first, the kind of things that wouldn't alarm anyone who wasn't paying attention. Vanessa taking phone calls in the garden, voice dropped low, hand curved around the receiver. A car parked across the street twice in the same week, engine idling. A name, Remy, spoken quickly into the phone before Vanessa noticed Sarah passing the hallway and pivoted the conversation. Sarah said nothing. She filed it away the way a person files a receipt they're not sure they'll need. Then, 11 days before the wedding, she was cleaning Alexander's private study when she noticed something on the desk. The laptop was open. She would have walked past it. She had never snooped in 22 years, and she wasn't about to start. But the name on the screen stopped her feet. It was her employer's name, Alexander Mercer, in the header of a document she didn't recognize. Beneath it, a second name, Remy Ade, and beneath that, an account number, a Cayman Islands routing code, and a date, the date of the wedding, a transfer authorization pending marital confirmation. Her hands went cold. She read it twice, then a third time. The document was a pre-structured asset transfer, legal language, but the intent was clear. Upon the completion of the marriage ceremony, Vanessa Cole would gain joint signatory power over a subsidiary account tied to Alexander's core holdings. The transfer window, 72 hours post-vows. The secondary beneficiary listed for internal routing, Remy Ade. The same name from the phone call. Sarah stood in that study for a long time. The laptop screen dimmed. She stood there in the silence, cleaning cloth still in her hand, trying to decide what kind of woman she was going to be. She printed one line from the document, just one. She folded the paper. She put it in the pocket of her uniform. And for the next 3 days she carried it everywhere, trying to find the right moment, trying to find the courage. The morning of the wedding, she arrived at the cathedral early. She tried to reach Alexander through his assistant. Blocked. She tried to reach Marcus. Voicemail. Security personnel guided her firmly toward the staff entrance and told her to stay with the catering team. Time was collapsing. The music started. The guests rose. Vanessa appeared at the cathedral doors in a gown that cost more than most people's annual salary. And she was breathtaking, and she was smiling, and Sarah stood at the edge of the room with a folded piece of paper in her shaking hand, knowing that in approximately 4 minutes the most important decision of Alexander Mercer's life would be made for him. So she walked forward, past the guests, past the cameras, past a security guard who reached out and missed her arm by 2 inches. She moved with the quiet certainty of a woman who has already accepted every consequence. She reached the altar just as the officiant opened his book. She touched Alexander's arm. He turned. Their eyes met. She pressed the note into his palm without a word. He looked down at the folded paper. He looked back at her face, at the fear there and the grief and the absolute conviction, and something in his chest shifted before he even opened it. He unfolded the note. 5 words. Check the Cayman account first. The cathedral was silent in the way that only happens when 300 people collectively hold their breath. Alexander stood at the altar with a folded piece of paper in his hand and a look on his face that no one in that room had ever seen before. Not his attorneys, not his oldest friends, not the journalists outside. This was not the composed, controlled expression of a man who ran billion-dollar negotiations without blinking. This was something raw. This was the look of a man whose internal architecture was shifting beneath his feet. Vanessa watched him from 3 feet away. Her smile faltered. Alexander? Her voice was soft. Careful. He didn't answer immediately. His mind was already moving, rewinding through months of small moments that had felt like nothing and now felt like everything. The prenup conversation she had steered away from twice, laughing it off as unnecessary between people who truly trust each other. The offshore account discussion she had dismissed as boring finance talk. The way she had gently, persistently, lovingly encouraged him to put certain assets under a joint structure before the wedding. For tax efficiency, she had said. My advisor recommended it, she had said. He looked up. I need a moment, he said to the officiant. A ripple moved through the room, a murmur, a camera flash. Vanessa's smile was still on her face, but her eyes had changed. Alex, what is down? A moment, he repeated quietly. Firmly, he stepped down from the altar and walked to a side room off the nave, pulling out his phone before the door had even closed behind him. He called his attorney first. The phone rang twice. David, the Cayman subsidiary, is there anything I need to know? Silence. That silence lasted approximately 4 seconds, and in those 4 seconds Alexander felt something collapse inside him. Alex, David's voice was measured in the way that voices become measured when the person speaking is choosing each word like they're diffusing something. There is an account. It was flagged internally 2 weeks ago when our compliance team ran the pre-merger audit. We were going to discuss it after the honeymoon. We didn't think. Tell me now. Another pause. It's a joint beneficiary structure. It activates upon legal marriage. Signatory rights transfer within 72 hours of the ceremony. The secondary routing name is a Remy Ade. We haven't identified the connection yet, but the account shows a withdrawal pattern that suggests. Alexander ended the call. He stood in the small side room with vaulted ceilings and a single stained glass window, and he breathed. In, out. The way he had learned to breathe when his first company nearly collapsed and he had stood in an empty office at 2 in the morning, alone, deciding who he was going to be. If you're still watching up to this point, type "I'm still here" in the comment section right now and tell us, do you think Vanessa truly loved him, or was it calculated from the very beginning? We want to know your thoughts. He walked back into the cathedral. 300 faces turned toward him. Vanessa stood at the altar, composed now, her expression having shifted into something softer, more uncertain, the expression of a woman recalibrating. He walked to her slowly. He stopped in front of her, and he held out the note. She looked at the paper in his extended hand. She didn't take it immediately. When she did, her eyes moved across those 5 words, and the color in her face changed in a way that no amount of composure could conceal. "Is this a joke?" she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I hoped it was," he said. "Alexander, whoever gave you this is telling the truth, Vanessa." Her mouth opened, closed. "I've spent my entire life," he said, his voice still low, still controlled, though his hands were not entirely still, "building something real. I have been cheated by business partners. I have been lied to by people I trusted. I have sat across from men who shook my hand and stabbed me before I reached the door. And each time I rebuilt because I believed that the next thing would be real." He paused. "I believed you were real." "I am real," she said. And the remarkable thing, the thing that would stay with him for months, was that she sounded genuine. Her eyes were filling, her chin was trembling. "Alex, I love you, whatever you think you found." "Remy Ade," he said. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. She didn't say anything. "That's the secondary name on the transfer account," he said. "Your ex-husband bankrupt 2 years ago." He watched her face. "How long had he been planning this with you?" "It's not—" She stopped, started again. "It wasn't supposed to hurt you. It was supposed to be security. I have debt that you don't know about, Alex. Remy came to me 8 months ago and he said that if I didn't help him, he would—" She stopped again. "He would what?" She shook her head. "He would expose something," Alexander said quietly. Not a question. The silence that followed was its own answer. 300 guests had stopped pretending not to watch. The string quartet had set down their instruments. Someone near the back coughed once, and the sound carried through the whole cathedral. Vanessa looked at him with tears running down her face now. Real tears, he thought, which somehow made it worse rather than better. "I love you," she said again. "That part was never a lie." "I believe you," he said. She blinked, surprised. "I believe you loved me," he said, "but you loved something else more, or you were afraid of something more, and you chose to let that thing walk down this aisle with us without telling me." His voice broke just slightly on the last word. He recovered it. "That's not a marriage, Vanessa. That's a transaction with feelings attached." He stepped back. "Please go," he said. She stood motionless for a long moment. Then she straightened her spine, and he admired that about her even then, that she didn't crumble in front of 300 people, and she walked back down the aisle alone, her white gown trailing behind her, the cameras capturing every step. The door of the cathedral closed. The sound echoed. Alexander stood at the altar facing an empty aisle, and he was silent for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then he turned. He looked through the crowd until he found Sarah, still standing near the side of the room, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes red. He held her gaze. He nodded once. That was all. But she understood. The weeks that followed were the quietest of Alexander's life. He had weathered hostile takeovers. He had sat in courtrooms. He had been on the front page of financial papers during a crisis that nearly wiped out 3 years of work. He knew how to function in chaos. But this particular silence, the silence of a house that had briefly felt like home and now felt hollow again, was a different weight entirely. He carried it without complaint. He had learned a long time ago that certain griefs don't respond to strategy. His legal team moved quickly. The Cayman account was frozen within 48 hours. The transfer mechanism was dismantled. Remy Ade's name appeared in 3 additional documents that the compliance team had initially flagged but not escalated. A paper trail that told a story of something planned carefully over the better part of a year. Not a scheme built overnight. Not improvised. Patient. Alexander sat with that knowledge for a long time. He had been right about one thing. Vanessa had loved him. His attorney confirmed it, in a strange indirect way, when the investigation revealed that she had tried to pull out of the arrangement twice in the 6 months before the wedding. There were messages between her and Remy that showed her pushing back, arguing, saying she couldn't go through with it. Remy's responses were aggressive, threatening. He had leverage over her from a period in their marriage she had never spoken about publicly, and he had used that leverage like a crowbar. None of it made Alexander feel better. It made him feel something more complicated than better. Grief and anger and something adjacent to pity. Not the condescending kind, but the kind that acknowledges that people can love genuinely and fail catastrophically at the same time. That love and self-preservation can occupy the same heart. That a person can mean every tender moment and still walk you toward the edge of a cliff. He did not contact Vanessa. He didn't need to. He understood the story now, and understanding was enough. Forgiveness, he decided, was something he could extend privately, quietly, without it needing to look like reconciliation. What he couldn't forgive, and wouldn't pretend to, was the choice she had made when she stood at those crossroads. She had chosen silence. She had chosen to let the vows happen and deal with the consequences later. That choice, regardless of the pressure she was under, was hers. And it had cost her everything. Vanessa disappeared from the social circuit entirely. She moved to a different city. The headlines ran for 2 weeks, breathless, speculative, frequently wrong. And then the news cycle moved on, the way it always does, chasing the next shining disaster. Alexander declined every interview request. 3 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, he found Sarah in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, making tea the way she always made tea, methodically, quietly, without fuss. He sat across from her at the kitchen island for the first time in 22 years, not standing, not passing through, sitting the way you sit with someone who matters. She looked up, slightly startled, then composed. "Sit," he said. "Please." She sat. For a moment neither of them spoke. She wrapped both hands around her mug. He stared at the surface of the counter. "You could have said nothing," he said finally. "You knew that if she became my wife, your position here was secure for the rest of your life. You knew that if I was angry, or if I didn't believe you, you could have lost everything you'd built here." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said simply. "Why?" he asked, not rhetorically, genuinely. He wanted to know. She looked at him directly, which was not something she often did. "Because I watched you build this. I watched you give up sleep and food and company for years. I watched you come home from meetings where people had tried to take things from you, and I watched you keep going anyway." She paused. "No one was going to take it from you while I was standing in the room. That's all." Alexander was quiet for a long time. "That's all," he repeated softly. He reached across the counter and placed his hand over hers briefly, the gesture of a man who was not naturally demonstrative and was choosing to be anyway. Then he leaned back and told her what he had decided. He had spoken to his estate attorney. Sarah's name was being added to the foundation he had established in his mother's memory, not as staff but as a trustee. A percentage of the foundation's annual grants would be directed toward a fund in her name, supporting widowed women in professional domestic work who were seeking housing stability and health care. Her current salary would be tripled. Her position in the household, for as long as she wanted it, was permanent. Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, her eyes filled. "You don't have to," she began. "I know," he said. "That's rather the point." She looked out the kitchen window for a moment. The morning light was coming in clean and white. When she looked back, she had composed herself in the way that only people who have carried a great deal of grief know how to compose themselves. Quickly, quietly, without making others responsible for the weight. "Thank you," she said. "No," he said, "thank you." And that was the conversation. No speeches, no ceremony, just two people at a kitchen table, tea going slightly cold, the morning quiet around them. He thought about what Vanessa had said at the altar, "I love you." And he thought about what Sarah had said in the kitchen, "No one was going to take it from you while I was standing in the room." And he understood, perhaps more clearly than he ever had, that love announces itself in many different registers. Some of them are loud and romantic, and arrive in white gowns with string quartets. Some of them wear gray uniforms and spend 22 years being invisible, and walk to the front of a cathedral at the worst possible moment, because the alternative is unthinkable. One of those kinds of love had tried to cost him everything. The other had saved him. He learned something in the months that followed, something he hadn't expected to learn, something that arrived not in a boardroom or a courtroom, but in the quiet of a rebuilt life. He had spent 30 years believing that trust was a liability, that closeness was a risk, that the safest version of any relationship was one where the boundaries were clear and the exposure was minimal. He had built walls the height of cathedrals and called them wisdom, but Sarah had walked through them without asking permission. And in doing so, she had handed him back something he hadn't known he'd lost, the understanding that loyalty, real loyalty, the kind that costs something, is not a transaction. It is not purchased with salary or security or status. It lives in the people who have nothing to gain and choose you anyway. He sat with that for a long time. Some betrayals, he realized, don't happen after the vows. They happen before them, and sometimes the quietest voice in the room is carrying the loudest truth. Now we want to hear from you. What would you have done in Alexander's position? Should he have forgiven Vanessa? Do you believe she truly loved him, or was every moment calculated? Drop your answer in the comments below. Like this video if the story moved you. And if you aren't subscribed to True Spark Stories yet, now is the time. Because every week we bring you stories like this one. Stories about love and loyalty and the choices that change everything. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, and we will see you in the next one.